On the 4th of March this year, I had the great privilege to move the debate in Westminster Hall on e-petition 232220, funding for schools. The debate was packed and lively, as we've heard earlier, with many honourable members sharing the difficulties their local schools are facing due to insufficient funding. And it was a particular privilege for me because this petition was started by Mr Andrew Ramanandi, the head teacher of St Joseph's Primary School in Blaydon, in my constituency. And it was signed by over 3,300 people from Blaydon constituency, as many others from other parts of the country. And it was built on a campaign which started with a letter co-signed by head teachers of primary, secondary and SEND schools in Gateshead, who became increasingly alarmed at the impact that a real terms reduction in school funding is having on the children and young people in their care. The letter sent to parents before Christmas, informing them that schools may no longer to be able to provide the same level of education, asked them for their support in raising their concerns with government. And 71 out of 76 schools in Gateshead Borough are facing real term reductions in funding. At the same time, costs, as we've heard, are rising, and so are pupil numbers in Gateshead as elsewhere in the country. The government's own statistics show that England's schools have 137,000 more pupils in the system, and the Institute for Fiscal Studies acknowledge that schools have suffered an 8% real terms reduction in spending per pupil, despite growing numbers of pupils coming through the door. So with increasing numbers of pupils and decreasing funding in real terms, schools have had to make cuts in staffing, as well as in all budget areas, looking for greater efficiencies in supplies and services. Head teachers in my constituency tell me that as funding has become tighter, schools have had to cut back on essential resources, teaching and non-teaching staff, support staff who work with vulnerable pupils, small group work and interventions with children who aren't thriving, teaching resources, subject choices, classroom and extracurricular activities, repairs for buildings and renewal of equipment. In preparation for the debate, I visited a number of schools across Blaydon. One of them was Portobello Primary School in Berkeley, where the head teacher and governors of this great community school talked to me about their concerns about funding pressures. They told me that in the last year they've lost 4 valuable members of staff to redundancy, including a higher level teaching assistant with 20 years experience in early years, an experienced teacher who led on the arts curriculum, a highly skilled teaching assistant trained in supporting children with medical and education needs, and a dedicated school counsellor who supported young children with their mental health. They said the impact of real terms budget reductions has made it hard to deliver specific interventions with pupils. It's increasingly difficult to provide the personal and emotional support for vulnerable pupils. They've lost decades' worth of experience and curriculum knowledge and are finding it harder and harder to take children on educational visits and purchase up-to-date teaching resources and equipment. I mentioned Mr Andrew Ramanandi of St Joseph's Primary School, where the children are very bright and very interested and clearly being brought to have inquiring minds. And he told me that the following day, after the debate, he was going to have to tell his staff about the impact of the redundancy consultation he was having to carry out. I caught up with him earlier this week to find out what had happened. Mr Ramanandi told me that 19 morning sessions and 4 afternoon sessions now have no learning support in the classroom. He has had to lose a day's PPA cover by a qualified teacher who can deliver specialist curriculum. He's had to stop whole class brass and percussion music lessons. The school is oversubscribed, so it's not about less pupils, it's that the school has to bear the brunt of inflation and increased on costs. Mr Ramanandi said they're expecting an Ofsted inspection from September onwards under the new framework, which will be looking at the quality of curriculum. However, due to funding problems, he has had to make decisions over redundancies and spending, which will potentially stop them being an outstanding school. Madam Deputy Speaker, I could go on, but I will finish by saying that head teachers, parents and governors right across Blaydon all want the Minister to provide higher funding for our schools, fair funding for our children and young people. And I hope that, and so do I hope that the Minister will be able today, almost 8 weeks after that Westminster Hall debate, to give us all that assurance.
Scott Mann.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's